This is Pastor Jim Driscoll of Christ Lutheran Church with the NCTV 45 thought for the day. First, make no mistake that the church, the Christian church, is the moral conscience of the world. You may disagree. Certainly, there are haters out there in the world that no matter what you're going to dispute anything about the church, but the church has been the moral conscience of the Western world since the incarnation of Christ. There's no institution, no church that has any kind of moral standing that the Christian church has. And this includes many churches who call themselves Christians and they just aren't. Jesus was a pacifist, but Jesus never had any issue with soldiers or any of the other, as it were, law enforcement of his time, except, of course, the obvious, when he was unfairly convicted and executed. But there's never been an expectation in genuine Christian philosophy that precludes the possibility of a war, legitimate law enforcement, and issues such as capital punishment. These issues are always raised by people who aren't legitimate theologians and throw around things like, well, that's not fair and that's not what Jesus would do. They have no idea what Jesus would or wouldn't do. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that Jesus had no issues with the military, law enforcement of the time. It's basically the same thing. I see nowhere where Jesus could be called a pacifist. Having said that, certainly the church has a responsibility to call out leadership in times of war and of civil unrest. We are Americans. We certainly know about checks and balances. Again, most of the time, the people who prattle about peace and love, and then they're the first ones to cry long and loud when their rights are infringed on and they expect someone to enforce their rights. It's just hypocrisy. People have a political agenda and trying to force their uninformed, frankly ignorant prejudices on everyone else because it bothers them. No question, war should bother people. You might be surprised to know that the people it bothers most are the ones who are called to engage in the war. There is what is called the just war doctrine, and there are certain just wars. American political and military leaders do refer to this just war doctrine, which is certainly more than Muslim leaders or communist or socialist leaders or Nazi leaders or any kind of other leaders in the world refer to. All of those who see war as simply an instrument to build their power and their wealth, depending on whose nest is being feathered. I found this description of just war doctrine, just war theory, or bellum justum, it's the Latin, is a moral and legal framework defining when war is permissible. Jus ad bellum, in other words, when it's just enough to have conduct war, and how it should be conducted, jus in bello. Developed by theologians like Augustine and Aquinas, it demands a just cause, proper authority, right intention, last resort, and proportionality to ensure war is a last resort to minimize suffering. Let's talk more about just war and doing so knowledgeably and not a knee-jerk reaction to every time war for some use of force is necessary. I'm Jim Driscoll, pastor of Christ Lutheran Church, 1302 East Washington Street, Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Check us on the web. It's christlutheran-newcastle.org. Questions, comments, contact me on the website. For a transcript of today's thought, go to revjamesdriscollmdiv.com. Sunday worship is at 10:30 a.m. All are welcome. With the NCTV 45 thought for the day, God bless your day. Hi, this is Pastor Jim Driscoll of Christ Lutheran Church with the NCTV 45 thought for the day. We're talking about the use of force in war, even civil disturbances. I've been seeing these videos lately of protesters defending non-citizens, trying to convince the rest of us that people who are not citizens have rights as Americans. They certainly have basic human rights, not to be harmed, to meet basic needs, but to also be sent back to their country of origin. If they want to be American citizens, there are ways to do that. Just barging into the country does not constitute a legitimate way to become an American citizen. Please spare me your empty rhetoric that is, well, no one belongs in the country except Native Americans. And it's always spouted by people who have absolutely no ancestry in Native Americans. I'm 1/16 part Osage Indian on my mother's side. And on my father's side, I'm a direct descendant of John Alden, who is one of the original pilgrims in 1620 in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So I'm pretty sure my credentials are way better than yours. So try to focus on reality and not screaming silly, obnoxious rhetoric. You see federal agents who are charged with removing people from the country who have not been properly vetted as citizens. We know for a fact that there have been terrorists of all stripes, convicted criminals, persons involved in narcotics, human trafficking, pedophilia, rape, murder, etc., who are in the country illegally. But anyone without the proper vetting is here illegally, by definition, committing a criminal act and have no rights to the extent that prohibits them from being removed from the United States and returned to their country of origin. I was trained as a federal customs officer in the United States Coast Guard and am very familiar with the law. So you can tell me your uninformed opinion, but that doesn't change the law and the fact that the vast majority of Americans have no interest in changing the law, despite what you think that you consider unfair, mean, or you just have some political agenda that has no basis in reality. And frankly, I feel for the customs officers, ICE officers who are doing their best to enforce the laws of our country. The people who are screaming, throwing things at them, attacking them with weapons, attacking them with their motor vehicles. There's no justification for their actions whatsoever, despite what they think. And I sincerely hope that they are promptly arrested, tried, and put in federal prison for many years. What we see in these streets are people who are participating in rebellion against the United States. They are well aware that their actions are completely illegal, that there is no real support for their positions. Even the political agenda is supported by a small number of people and cannot be justified in any way. That they harm American law enforcement officers is completely unacceptable. They need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I'm Jim Driscoll, the pastor of Christ Lutheran Church, 1302 East Washington Street, Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Check us on the web. It's christlutheran-newcastle.org. Questions, comments, contact me on the website. For a transcript of today's thought, go to revjamesdriscollmdiv.com. Sunday worship is at 10:30 a.m. All are welcome with the NCTV 45 thought for the day. God bless your day. This is Pastor Jim Driscoll of Christ Lutheran Church with the NCTV 45 thought for the day. I've been talking about contemporary warfare and the warfare rebellion that is going on in the streets of our country. As to the latter, despite what political agenda is and the perspective of public media, Those people who are attacking federal officers trying to do their job are a tiny minority of the population of this country. There is no meaningful support for repealing immigration laws in this country. In the discussion, if there were such support, there would be genuine legislation to change those laws, and there is simply none. Monday, I started out by acknowledging that the Christian church is and has been the conscience of the Western world for the last 2,000 years. Well, you may have mixed feelings about the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. You simply have to accept that it is expected for him to present the position of the church. The Roman church is made up of almost 1 billion people in the world. It is a sizable population. This does not mean that we necessarily follow the Pope's directions, but it certainly is a legitimate discussion of the issues. Certainly much more legitimate than the uninformed herd that is assaulting federal officers and trashing the streets of some of our cities to defend people who are unquestionably committing illegal acts, often more than just immigration laws. The Pope made some remarks about the war in Iran, which he has since significantly walked back. To his credit, that he has come to realize is simply not the position of the church or the international community. The Pope has the right to raise the issue. In fact, he should, along with church leaders who have responsible, knowledgeable opinions. The knee jerk nonsense that we hear from too many religious leaders who simply don't know what they're talking about and don't care. They just want to play to the crowd, and they have no interest in understanding and to pursue positions that are simply ignorant and untenable. I'm Jim Driscoll, pastor of Christ Lutheran Church, 1302 East Washington Street, Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Check us out on the web, christlutheran-newcastle.org. Questions, comments, contact me on the website. For a transcript of today's thought, go to revjamesdriscollmdiv.com. Sunday worship is at 10:30 a.m. All are welcome. With the NCTV 45 thought for the day, God bless your day. This is Pastor Jim Driscoll of Christ Lutheran Church with the NCTV 45 thought for the day. We continue to discuss the current criminal acts of people on city streets, a tiny minority of people who think that by virtue of their uninformed opinion that they can disrupt law enforcement, and for no particular reason except they find arresting people who are illegally in the country. They find this distasteful. Somehow attacking federal officers is somehow acceptable. And ultimately, you find that these people have no idea what they're doing. These obnoxious, harmful, hate-filled bigots do what they're told by politicians who have much to gain by these haters and a mainstream media that is simply interested in sensationalism and continuing to undermine American culture. The church has a responsibility to call out leadership in times of war and of civil unrest. We are Americans. We certainly know about checks and balances. We certainly expect religious leaders to step up and present Christian perspective on important subjects, but they have a responsibility to present those positions knowledgeably and with integrity. When these positions represent a small minority who are simply not informed, then that is not responsible action. The Iranian government has been led by pathological haters of the United States, of Christians, and of the Western world. These are people who come from a historic background dating back to the Crusades, when peaceful Christians in Africa, in the Middle East, were attacked, slaughtered, threatened with death if they did not convert to Islam. This was and continues to be to this day in Africa and the Middle East, in particular, murder of millions of people dating back over 1,700 years, and all committed by Muslims. Muslims attacked and invaded all of Spain, attacked from Eastern Europe, and got within 2 days' march of Paris. Nothing in American Christianity has happened like that until people like Hussein and the Iranian government were open active threat to the West. Please do not give me the lame argument about the Inquisition. The Inquisition lasted about 70 years, not about 600 years. Went into the middle of the 16th century, almost 500 years ago, and was responsible for about 80,000 deaths. There were other times, but none compared to the horrors inflicted by Islam from the 4th century until today in the 21st century, in 1,700 years. Instead of listening to every knee-jerk nonsense, whether it's the war and Iran or how illegal aliens are being somehow picked on, you might start exercising some critical thinking and realizing that we are being abused by a tiny minority of people who just don't know what they're talking about and don't care. This is their little thrill, getting out on the streets and confronting the man. Too bad they can't really do anything that's of general benefit to the rest of us in the culture instead of trashing our cities' streets and our cities, frankly. I'm Jim Driscoll, the pastor of Christ Lutheran Church, 1302 East Washington Street, Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Check us out on the web. It's christlutheran-newcastle.org. Questions, comments, contact me on the website. For a transcript of today's thought, go to revjamesdriscollmdiv.com. Sunday worship is at 10:30 a.m. All are welcome. With the NCTV 45 thought for the day, God bless your day. Hi, this is Pastor Jim Driscoll of Christ Lutheran Church with the NCTV 45 thought for the day. This week we started talking about issues involving the Iranian war and the open rebellion and treason of people on the streets attacking federal officers, trying to force legally promulgated federal law and enforce, that is, legally promulgated federal law in respect to people who have entered the country illegally, are not citizens, have rights only to the extent of not being harmed and being safely returned to their country of origin. They really don't even have the right to be returned. The fact that we do facilitates the process. I found the following summary of the Pope's comments that he has started to walk back and will continue, no doubt, because his comments simply have no justification. The Pope's comments have centered on the moral implications and human cost of the war, condemnation of tyrants. During a visit to Cameroon on April 16th, he stated the world is being ravaged by a handful of tyrants who spend billions on war while neglecting humanitarian needs like healing and education. Talk about uninformed. We spend much more on health and education than we do on the military. He goes on to say rejection of civilizational threats. He called Trump's threat to wipe out an entire civilization truly unacceptable. Yeah, it is. But you know what? A little over the top rhetoric once in a while is intended just to get people's attention. So again, lighten up a little. You don't know what you're talking about. That such actions carry a grave moral issue for the good of the whole entire population. Yeah, but it's over. Let's test the rhetoric of the other people in the world and see what their overblown rhetoric is like. Delusion of omnipotence. Oh, give me a break. At a peace vigil, he denounced the delusion of omnipotence and the idolatry of self, fueling the war, demanding that leaders stop and negotiate peace. They have been. Not only that, but there are way too many layers, way too many leaders to say that this is just by one person. Again, stop it. Give me a break. Theology versus war. He has explicitly stated that Jesus is the King of Peace. No one can use him to justify war, and I'm pretty sure no one really is. And Jesus is the King of Peace, no question, but it's also the realization of knowing that there is just wars, as we have discussed. No one can use him to justify war. No one should and has, to the best of my knowledge. And noted that God rejects the prayers of those who wage war with hands full of blood. Really, Pope? You aren't the person to decide who God rejects their prayers of. That's way over your pay grade. There is what is called the just war doctrine, and there are certain just wars. American political and military leaders do refer to this just war doctrine, which is more than Muslim leaders, communists, social leaders, Nazis, anybody else in the whole world other than Western Christians who do refer to it. These other leaders see their war as simply an instrument to build their power and their wealth. Just war theory is a moral and legal framework defining when war is permissible and how it should be conducted. It was developed by theologians like Augustine and Aquinas. Certainly, Augustine is recognized across Christianity. And so, in terms of that, Christians are united in their belief in the just war. What it is, its proper authority, right intention, last resort, and proportionality to ensure war is a last resort to minimize suffering. In the Pope's comments, we see the old style rhetoric employed by communists, socialists, Nazis, and other fringe political movements that really don't concern themselves with reality. A large part of the thinking of just war doctrine was promulgated by Aquinas and Augustine, doctors of the Roman Catholic Church. Since I'm a Lutheran pastor and Martin Luther was highly influenced by St. Augustine, there is a lot of common ground in Christianity in the just war doctrine. There is a just cause. We have known for decades that the Iranian government has every intention of building nuclear weapons. These weapons would no doubt be used to impose their authority over at least the Middle East, and as their technology grows, be used to threaten much of the world. Well, the Pope may be raising objections. The rest of the world really is not, because they know that the Iranian government is a threat to peace. The choice is dealing with that threat now or waiting until the Iranian government has the ability to inflict much more damage on the world than it has already inflicted, and then trying to subdue the Iranian government, which would be exponentially more difficult. We see a government that has gunned down tens of thousands of their own citizens in the last few years, a country that took Americans hostage, that is unquestionably the center of Muslim terrorism in the world, supports terrorists like Hamas, who are responsible for the deaths of thousands of Israelis. Most recently, the unprovoked October 6th attack of innocent civilians, which is only now being unraveled. And certainly, this action meets the requirements of just war. The Pope has a right to object to this war, but questions are in order for this Pope and recent popes as to where their voice was when innocent civilians in Iran were being gunned down and terrorized in many ways, and where neighbors Iran are being threatened and attacked even now. If you're going to object to an action that is trying to bring stability and to impose the rule of law on men whose only rule is their self-aggrandizement, the leaders of Iran, for their wealth and their power, And then for the Pope to call President Trump a despot with delusions of omnipotence and to ignore all of the incredible abuse for decades of the Iranian government is either incredible ignorance or the Pope's own delusions of grandeur, because he's not dealing with reality. Thankfully, he has chosen to walk back many of these comments and has certainly shown that he needs to exercise a lot more discretion. At first, make no mistake that the church, the Christian church, is knowledgeable in the future. I'm Jim Driscoll, the pastor of Christ Lutheran Church, 1302 East Washington Street, Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Check us out on the web, christlutheran-newcastle.org. Questions, comments, contact me on the website. For a transcript of today's thought, go to revjamesdriscollmdiv.com. Sunday worship is at 10:30 a.m. All are welcome. With the NCTV 45 thought for the day, God bless your day.